Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives with José Barzola. Peacebuilding initiatives are collaborative ways of developing healthy, positive relationships via dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, exploring ways to shift our own perspective to build compassion and empathy within our communities. Thank you for joining us today. On today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Antonyappan, a seasoned professor at California State University in Sacramento, with over 25 years of experience at the intersection of law, social work, and education. Dr. Antonyappan brings a rich and deeply human perspective to everything she does. She holds a PhD in social welfare and a Juris Doctor, and her work is rooted in social justice, ethical leadership, and the power of real-world learning. Beyond the classroom, she's a leader in faculty development and pedagogical innovation, trained in quality learning and teaching, AI-enhanced education, institutional transformation. But at her heart, she's a mother, a grandmother, and a lifelong seeker of wisdom, grounded in compassion, even amidst life's chaos. She recently attended a high-level political forum on sustainable development under the auspices of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations in New York. Both the ceremonial and substantive sessions highlighted the imperative for international collaboration for health, equality, economic progress, and environmental protection. I emphasize this specifically because her experiences there are very relevant to our conversation today. In today's conversation, she will share about her insights on appreciative and emotional intelligence for building peace, alliances, and conflict resolution. It is truly an honor to have you as a returning uh, conversation. And so I look forward to delving further into this. So thank you so much for being here today. To get us started, might you share with our listeners the understanding that has evolved over the years about appreciative intelligence, emotional intelligence, which most folks, I'm always surprised still till this day, are not aware that that exists, and the connections between the two. I feel like we're always talking, or you hear about IQ, and we don't learn about these other aspects of our mind. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Well, yes, we did our previous segments on spiritual intelligence, integrative intelligence, and now we are going to talk about and collective intelligence. We did one on collective intelligence too. So, emotional intelligence and appreciative intelligence are two forms of intelligence besides the abstract intelligence or intelligence quotient, which is a traditional intelligence measurement that we use, have gained a great deal of momentum in the last few decades. Emotional intelligence, as you know, Daniel Goleman is the psychologist who actually popularized the term because of the relevance for not just personal well-being, but for community well-being and in specific industries. Likewise, appreciative intelligence also was popularized of some scientists. So one of the key researchers is actually one of my good friends called Tojo Tachinkiri, who teaches at George Mason University here in Washington, D.C. He also developed the concept of appreciative inquiry, which I'll delve into a little bit later. But what is emotional intelligence? I mean, after all, aren't we socialized to be emotionally mature and emotionally reasonable, prudent individuals? Well, one may imagine so, or why we consider ourselves are emotionally intelligent individuals, but it's not consciously developed through our education system, in our organizations, and to some extent, even in our families and communities. So, emotional intelligence essentially is the capacity to recognize our emotions and to be aware of our responses to instances and to be able to navigate through our responses. And so, right, so it's not just saying, I feel rotten. That is a statement that we may have a self conversation with us, but that is a very generic term. But what part of that we don't feel good about? And how do we navigate through our response system? If our response is one of fury, is that the right response? Or do we have the capacity to perceive that instance apart from the triggers that we would normally have, to any situations? Because most of us react to situations based on how we are programmed. And now we know from a brain, neuro developmental perspective that our prefrontal cortex is responsible for our, capacity to respond to situations and, cognitive processes, especially complex cognitive processes, as well as our decision making. In fact, they have established a sort of a connection between violence and the functioning of or limited capacity for prefrontal cortex functions. So knowing that to some extent our biological processes are dependent upon how we react to situations, and that the way we are educated and raised, the way we are socialized, help us modulate those through processes in terms of recognizing, understanding our emotions, and also navigating through our response patterns by being aware of it is called emotional intelligence. So if we have those emotional intelligence as part of our repertoire, then leadership, for instance, is a construct that is considered as closely aligned with emotional intelligence. And now it is becoming billions of dollars worth industry because leaders of organizations, particularly corporations, are recognizing that leaders with emotional intelligence lead organizations that also have high emotional intelligence. So now they're saying emotional intelligence is not just for the organizations, not just for individuals, sorry, but also for organizations. In fact, organizations collectively, through organizational survey, they have established when they have high emotional intelligence, they also are 18 times tend to be far more oriented toward positive outcomes. And that is saying a lot about the importance of individuals with the capacity to recognize, understand their emotions, and be aware of their response patterns and be able to navigate through those response patterns. That's what essentially, emotional intelligence is. But in order for us to cultivate emotional intelligence, we need empathy. We need to be able to understand empathetically, what the other person is experiencing. And that would require for us to perceive the other person's emotions without any judgment, without non-judgmental attitude. And it also needs certain degree of internal locus of control, a sense of comfort with ourselves, a sense of acceptance of the self, so that we have space for accepting the other, right? It's very important to accept the other as accepting ourselves. If our mind is so full of what we are all about, that it is so full of the self-oriented sort of internal conversation, we are not able to listen to the other person. So when we have an internal locus of control, we are also comfortable in our own skin, and we can then accept the other person's presence, their emotions, their interest, the way they perceive their life. Then conversation becomes easy. Then we are able to navigate through the process, whether it's negotiation or conflict resolution. Any dispute resolution mechanism requires individuals to have certain degree of, empathy, certain degree of internal locus of control, and also the capacity to align ourselves, our values with our principles. And these are all conditions that we hope that our children will learn in our schools through daily as a practice, conscious practice to develop emotional intelligence through mindfulness techniques, through journaling, through social activities, because emotional intelligence also involves social intelligence to be able to function efficaciously as social beings. Now we come to appreciative intelligence. Appreciative intelligence is essentially the capacity to reframe any situation from being a situation of problems or deficit-oriented situation to a circumstance of positive feelings, positive affirmations. So instead of looking at the problem or the deficits, we employ a strength-based approach. And we say, what are the strengths of this particular situation, this particular circumstance? Many organizations like Southwest Airlines, Netflix, and many other organizations have used appreciative intelligence and appreciative inquiry principles to be able to, build their organization, to grow their organization, to develop a positive organizational culture. But in terms of, conflict resolution, appreciative intelligence begins with appreciative inquiry, as it does in many other circumstances too. Appreciative inquiry asks, how can we reframe the situation to look at the potential in this particular circumstance? How can we look at the positive aspect, perspective taking taking the perspectives of the people involved in this particular circumstance, and how do I appreciate their concerns, their strengths, their positions, and moving away from positions to interest, so that our negotiation, our resolution mechanisms can be toward a harmonious outcome that is acceptable to both the parties, wherever there's conflict resolution or peace building is. So these two are interlinked in many ways. You have to have emotional intelligence in order to be able to appreciate, and you have to have appreciative inquiry and appreciative intelligence in order to be able to develop a sense of coherence, a sense of being possessing the capacity to navigate through your self-aware, what you're aware of regarding your responsive patterns, so that there is a positive interaction that is rich with positive outcomes. Now, I want to do say something. Not every situation, not every person, not every circumstance comes with a positive value. There are potentially absolutely situations that does not have any positive, no matter how hard you want to reframe and look for positive aspect, there's nothing in it, like children starving has no positive perception. There's no way you can positively reframe it by saying that this should be allowed under any circumstance. We have to stop it. That's the only way to respond to starvation of children. But like, for instance, a Spanish chef, Andres, would develop the world, kitchen, where he literally cooks, uses his expertise to cook meals and deliver foods. Even then, some 7 members of his team were, targeted, and some lives were taken as a process of, when they were cooking meals and delivering in particular conflict-ridden circumstance. So when we talk about chronic conflicts, when we talk about individuals who consider themselves as incapable of reconciling for peace under certain conditions are met, and those conditions are nebulous or impractical, then we cannot say, okay, let's go and use our emotional intelligence and appreciative intelligence, because there are fundamental notions of injustice and chronic patterns of interaction that need to be taken into consideration before we can say, let's reframe the situation. And so if they're able to, sit down for resolving their conflict in good faith, and to be able to appreciate each other, to be able to have that capacity for empathy, placing themselves in the other person's shoes, like in the example that I gave in our segment on, integrate collective intelligence. Sorry. So then it is possible for us to reframe the situation, but to somehow believe that emotional intelligence and appreciative intelligence are magically endowed with the capacity to change any circumstance wouldn't be an appropriate way of, presenting them. But we need to have them developed as a fundamental requisite for being actualizing, self-actualizing, having the motivation to have positive social interactions and positive social outcomes.
Thank you.
Did
Yeah.
that explain well? Do you
Yeah,
need
no, no,
to?
that was wonderful. And I think one of the things you really resonates with me is empathy. I just don't think we talk about it enough. Maybe we
Yeah,
talk about it, but
absolutely.
I just don't think a lot of people uh embedded in their everyday conversations, or like even in the workplace. It's not something
Yeah,
that, people are coming together for a meeting. It's like, let's have a conversation about empathy in the workplace. It's like, is there even space, or because it's an
yeah,
emotion, and when
yeah.
we talk about emotional intelligence, it's happening constantly, but um we tend to not acknowledge it or talk about it, and It's like the elephant in the room kind of thing,
Yeah,
and it's a missed opportunity. That's what I'm getting at.
absolutely.
I wonder if you might share how can emotional intelligence be used, sorry, in promoting readiness for conflict resolution and peace building alliances in your experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, as an experienced conflict resolution and mediation specialist, you know that many of those situations come with acrimonious, attitude and incidents and prior histories. So, the components of emotional intelligence and appreciative intelligence, for instance, that we discussed, beginning with, recognizing our own emotions and understanding our own emotions, and then appreciating the emotions and the valuations of the other party, is extremely important as a beginning, or requirement for proceeding in our conflict resolution mechanisms. I mean, most conflict resolution mechanisms start with a desire for peace, right? So it exists at the micro level, at the meso level, and at the macro level. Let me give an example from the macro level. For instance, the Nobel Peace Prize was established by Alfred Nobel, as we all know. And the first person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize was a woman, Bertha von Suttner, and who was absolutely devastated by the conflict in her own nation. And she went to Alfred Nobel and said that I would like you to establish a peace prize. And he said, okay, work for it, convince me and why it is important. So she wrote a book called Lay Down Your Arms. And so she essentially discussed through many stories the havoc that any conflict wreaks on individuals who had nothing to do with that. So even at, that's a macro level conflict. And she eventually convinced Alfred Nobel, and she was the first one to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And so as a process, in that process, she was able to document the devastation that human beings experience when they are subjected to unnecessary violence through no fault of their own. Now, if you look at the world today, this happens at the micro level, at the meso level, and at the macro level. So, what do we understand by violence? As we know, as you and I know, peace is not just the absence of violence. It is a state of being open to collaboration, being open to engagement with our fellow brothers and sisters. So, in that perspective, conflict resolution is a transformative experience. It is a form of transforming our own understanding of a given situation to a larger, transformation of our micro level situations, our meso level, our community level, appraisal of the situation, as well as our macro level, understanding of what conflicts are about. I mean, conflict doesn't have to be brushed under, or it doesn't have to be prevented. We don't have to be conflict averse. We can look at the conflict and the risks involved in the conflict and say, how can we use this to move to a transformative approach, to transform what is needed? Right now, there are 24 active conflicts taking place in the world where children are dying, women are being assaulted, young men are being forced to go fight, and the older persons are being robbed of their companionship, their nutrition. So we can look at this world and say, this is just one planet, tiny little planet, in this one solar system of the trillions of systems or stars that are on our planet. So proportionately speaking, our intelligence has not even grown to living with that expansive mind frame in a day-to-day life. We are still limited in our understanding of what we are about and what our bodies are about and our place in the universe, our place in our ecosystem, in our own planetary system. So in India, for instance, no matter what religion you are, we just, can learn what is called the Brahma Gayatri mantra. Indian in the foundational Hindu culture is very much oriented towards sound and light and language in itself as a form of uplifting yourself from a frame of mind that is ordinary to, super natural, or, to be aligned with the divine principles. So the Brahma Gayatri mantra, essentially it goes, Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha Tatsavidurvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yona Prachodayat. It is Sanskrit, or it's all in Sanskrit, which essentially says, I don't want to go step by step translation, but illuminate my intelligence with your divine intelligence. That's what it is. And so we acknowledge that there is divine intelligence in our world that we experience. We don't even acknowledge the power of gravity, the power of light, the power of sound, electromagnetism, and so many other forces. Now we know the quantum physics and all of those physical laws. We live in almost unbelievably complex world, and our bodies are unbelievably complex. I mean, if we think about our own physical system, the number of trillions of cells, and even our own brains grow. Now we know we continue to grow. We can reconnect the neural networks, and all of that, will help it to thrive. So knowing so much about what we have established through science, through orderly mechanism of evidence-based approaches, we should be humble enough to say, how do we focus on what that matters, which is peace, as opposed to conflict, which just destroys everyone in the end? I cannot think of one conflict that robbed people of their rights and served another community for a longer period of time. I mean, Germany's Holocaust, the genocide, 6 million members of the Jewish community were slaughtered for no reasons, starved to death, and deprived of their fundamental human rights, the most deceptive and devastatingly grotesque manner. So were members of the Roma community, members of some of the Catholic communities, members of the LGBTQ communities. And for what? From 1938 to 39, Hitler invaded Poland. Poland was every country had its own problems, but was a peacefully society until then. He, deprived them of their fundamental rights. And it took exactly 5 years for the entire Nazi regime to fall. Hitler took his own life, and so did his, associates who perpetrated this evil, for lack of a better word, unlawful, activities on entire humanity in so many different places. So, and we see the same thing in what Stalin did. 20 more than we say, we are told, nearly 20 million perished in at that time in Russia itself. So, and we know in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, and there are so many, and through the Cultural Revolution in other countries, and so many different conflicts, but none of them lasted to deprive human beings of their fundamental goodness. So they may last for a while, these negative conflicts, but essentially all human beings thrive for homeostasis. We thrive for equanimity. We strive for peace. So the longing for peace is inherently within us. Children may argue, they may fight, but they eventually want to go back and play with each other and, and enjoy life. So therefore, when we help us understand our emotions, and we, understand that certain individuals with a predominance of psychopathology and fury and unable to have an internal locus of control, always desiring external locus of control, and not having the capacity or motivation to understand or empathize others, may wreak havoc on the world, like Hitler did, and Stalin did, and so many other dictators did, but they're not going to last. So why subject ourselves to that suffering? Why cannot we focus on appreciating, each other, and recognizing our own emotions, And when we are not in a position to negotiate because our own emotions are so dominant and we are seeking selfish solutions to a situation that requires both parties to be fully engaged, we need to bring our social intelligence, our capacity for empathy, our capacity to motivate ourselves for a positive outcome that is not reliant on our positions, but our interest, our shared interest and collective interest. So, therefore, in the components of emotional intelligence and the components of appreciative intelligence in reframing the situation, look for the positive and appreciate others and envision the possibility. What is the possibility of the future? Those are the three main components of appreciative intelligence. And we already discussed the components of emotional intelligence. When we bring these two both, then our negotiations can be free of prejudice, free of bias, free of self-interest, and free of being guided by pure emotions, as opposed to reasoning-based prudent goals, which we want to use as a process, to arrive at positive outcomes that both the parties feel that they accomplished what they set out to accomplish, and this is transforming their immediate environment and their future possibilities.
Well, thank you. I know that cultivating appreciative intelligence may take a lifetime. So, what measures do you propose for developing a framework to appreciate oneself and others through the process of conflict resolution?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because no one comes with the entire set of the emotional intelligence skills or appreciative intelligence skills. It is learned and it can be learned at any point in time. Some of the, there are a number of videos and books on cultivate your emotional intelligence, there are some on appreciative intelligence, but they all focus on one thing, which is awareness, which is mindfulness, and being mindful of our own capacity for not fully understanding a situation, and being aware of our own emotions, so that we know that our approach to a social situation is not purely guided by our emotions, but by our awareness of what is in inherent in that particular circumstance. So mindfulness techniques have been demonstrated as being efficient in furthering emotional intelligence. Other technique which is very useful is reflection. Reflecting on what we do and to be mindful of as we go about our life. I can give you one example, and I focus on my children having an international experience. So my daughter went to an international school in India where 91 countries were represented in that school. Children from 91 different countries, studied there. And my older son, went to J. Krishnamurti. I don't know whether you've heard of J. Krishnamurti's work. He's a philosopher, Indian, very well known, internationally known, the Theosophical Society at that time, the late 1800s and early 90s. He came up with this theory that one of the reasons why the world is full of conflict and absence of peace and ignorance is because we are not training our children, educating them properly. So he started what is called as the J. Krishnamurti schools, where essentially awareness was, being aware was a primary focus, and removing the fear of the unknown. And he said, people talk of revolutions in society. You cannot have a successful revolution unless you have a personal revolution, where you, change your own ways of perception, your own conditionings in society, where do not accept all of your fellow human beings as your brothers and sisters. He said that is the foundational requirement for peace. Not taking anyone for granted. As I told you, when I gave birth to my children in the first, episode on spiritual intelligence, I said, my first thought was, how can any human being take another for granted? We are such unique divine beings, each one of us. So he actually believed in that, and he established in many parts of the world, and one in India and one in UK. And the UK school was known as Brockwood School. It was one of the very nice environment, had a lot of land around. So my older son, I sent him. It's a, relatively expensive, private school. And so these children stay there, and, they are treated with extreme dignity and respect. And he had a class, for instance, called Listening to the Earth. So the teacher would take them through the, garden, and they had like a lot of trees, and to simply be quiet and listen to the earth, the birds, and the sound that the leaves made, and to register their emotions and their reactions. And so they also started the day with half an hour of quiet time, where everybody would gather. They would sit quietly for half an hour. And we might ask, well, how many children can sit quietly for half an hour? But they all did. And because, well, one of the requirements of the school was the parent had to go with the child. And while the child stayed at the school, the parent did the next very nice, like a facility for the parents to stay and read about the philosophy. And so every day the parent can meet with the child, and they would observe, and only if the rest of the community felt that the child is ready to be in that boarding school, and the child is happy, child says, yeah, I love that, I can stay here, then the parent can leave after a week. So interesting story. My youngest one, Sachi, also went to that school. I went through the same process for 1 week, and he didn't like it at all. He's like, Mom, I want to come home. So at the end of the week, he came home with me. But my older son stayed there at the school, and he absolutely loved it. So that period of mindful, quiet, reflection helped them, create that, build that emotional intelligence, and that appreciation for each other, appreciation for the environment, appreciation for the food. It was all vegetarian food that they had to eat, and because you don't want to hurt anyone, non-violence in their thinking and their approach. So that is a way of cultivation too. Other way of cultivating requires like what my mother taught me. I mean, everything I'm telling, I believe that I cannot share with something that I myself haven't, or fully practiced or in the process of fully comprehending. So one thing my mother taught me was what is called a soul search. Do it every day before you go to bed, which is starting from the time you wake up. Ask yourself, what did I do? What did I do? And go out through the entire day and ask, what could I improve? What did I do well? And what did not do well? And what do I need to learn? And I still do that most nights. Sometimes I'm so tired, I forget and I go to sleep. But most nights I do that, which prepares me to enter into that meditative sleep oriented mode, because sleep is rejuvenating, right? We don't understand. Most people just go to sleep watching television or something, but it needs to be a conscious activity. So, making sleep as a preparatory process, turning off all your devices and engaging in that soul search really helps me to get calm. And then now we know but scientifically that our spinal fluid, helps relieve our brain or cleans our brain of the plaque, which is supposedly causing Alzheimer's. And so they're saying if you want to avoid dementia and early onset, have a good night's sleep, 8 hours of sleep. So scientifically we know all that, but even then we don't prepare for a reflective approach to life. And it's not always possible to have a reflective approach all the time. When you have parental responsibilities, you are juggling transportation, getting things ready for your children and making sure they've done the homework, making sure they have the right nutrition. But as much as possible, it's cultivating that reflective frame of mind, cultivating that mindfulness, and appreciating each other, practicing empathy, and going beyond what seems to be the case. In appreciative intelligence, we don't take things at face value. We go beyond what seems to be at work. And someone might seem like they're not well put together, they are not coherent. And there might be a reason that maybe that's just a bad day, and and not to take things personally. It's all very important. But someone commits a personal violation, they do wrongly, say something, or they defame you wrongly. And then when you react, they say, well, you are being aggressive. That is not the right way for that person to respond. You don't say, oh, maybe you have a bad day. That's why you're thinking I'm being aggressive. No, we have to call out unjust situations for what they are. Otherwise, we are, enabling that unjust person to continue to be unjust. So it's important to call that out. It doesn't mean that we passively allow actions of injustice to continue, or actions of falsehood or defamation, or actions of boundary violations to continue. We call them out, but at the same time, if the other party realizes their mistake and want to have a transformative approach to resolve the conflict, we're always open to it. We encourage that. So even as conflict resolution, practitioners, we want to recognize where injustice is being sort of swept under the rug under the name of, oh, let us all come together. I think we have to call whatever elements of injustice that exist for what they are, and then we proceed from there. I think it's important to acknowledge that for effective conflict resolution mechanism. And that's why for both the parties to have the empathy and the emotional and appreciative intelligence to engage in a transformative conflict resolution is essential.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I so how do you go about do you network or build relationships that foster cultivation, appreciation in self and others? And I do want to also distinguish that building relationships and networking are not the same because I think there's a big difference between what they can teach you in like, how to work a room, here's my business card, as opposed to
Yeah.
actually getting to like a deeper conversation, which I think is truly what maybe appreciate, the cultivation and appreciation of self and others may delve into, but I let you take it away.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so glad, Jose, that you differentiated the two, because, in a lot of professional circles, oh, networking opportunities, and network, and give out business cards. I mean, we're all guilty of that. But what for? At some point we have to ask, how many of us really bother to know the other person? And even if I want to know, like for instance, at the HLPF, this is very common, right? And so you meet professionals and you ask what they do, and they present papers, and they ask for your viewpoint, and you share that. And then there is no time to understand why, for instance, someone is involved or so passionate about, preventing the use of plastics. Is it because they're passionate about children's well-being? We talk of brain development. We know that most children, brain development takes place the first 5 years of life. And we know microplastics are not good for children's brain development and so many other things. So therefore, when we want to appreciate the importance of protecting our environment and reducing the use of plastics, and when someone is so passionate about, instead of just saying, well, I liked your paper and give the card, or they give the card, we can ask, well, what led you to, do this research? And what has UNICEF to do with this? That kind of conversation where you actually build relationships, for a collective endeavor to transform our societies are not taking place. You're absolutely right. So therefore, networking for emotional intelligence can be, and appreciative intelligence can be part of that, a growing momentum for that in the economic sector, in the corporate sector. But building relationships, I think, has to be part of our educational sector, part of our organizations, no matter what kind of organizations we have, and part of our communities, and part of our, general ethos in how we build our societies, our groups, and our, overall a framework of referring to humanities. And so I met someone from Ghana at this HLPF, and they had a stall, him and his wife, and amazing people. And so they were talking about, how Ghana is one of those countries which I absolutely recognize because that is avoiding this internal strife and so many other problems that some of the African nations seem to be having through both internal and external bad faith actors. But essentially, they were talking about their commitment to understanding risk and preventing risk, whether it's corruption, whether it's managing organizations. And they do it by building relationships, and even the way they welcomed everyone who wanted to stop and talk to them, scan through the literature that they shared with those who, wanted to know more about their work. And they are essentially individuals who understand the importance of relationships and building relationships. And they, for instance, do extremely important work in preventing blindness, in preventing disability and giving opportunities for those who live with disabilities or who are not able-bodied. And they shared light on how giving them opportunities can actually enhance the economic production, enhance the economic well-being of the entire nation. So it was innovative, but at the same time, it's also humanistic. It builds on the human relationships by their attitude, by their, understanding of the importance of building relationships, both short term and long term, that can grow up to be long term, in where we appreciate each other's human reference point, not simply our monetary value or not simply our work related value, because we are trained to value each other by what we do for a living. And so therefore, our foundational, the greater aspect of our being are robbed by, referring ourselves simply as networking individuals as opposed to relationship building individuals. Yeah. So it's important for us to cultivate that and to know more than simple cursory exchange of small talk. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So what do you see as the role of societal pathology in undermining emotional intelligence?
I am so glad you asked that question because, there's so much talk about resilience. Oh, be resilient, look for the positive. And that somehow shifts the responsibility to the individual as opposed to societies doing something about it. A society, in my view, is pathological if it does not provide enough opportunities for children to fully actualize their potential. A society is pathological if it cherishes and celebrates accumulation of wealth at the hands of few, when the majority of the population is being forced to work for wages that are not capable of providing an adequate standard of living. A society is pathological when there is so much influence of those who have monetary resources in the democratic rights of the people that people's democratic rights are taken away by buying votes, by spending millions of dollars in the democratic representative system to rob the capacity for electing leaders who would place the interests of all the people, not just those who are loved and who have certain agenda on their mind. So therefore, we know that there are several societies that are run by dictators, those authoritarians, and those who do not have the interest of the entire nation as their primary goal. So in such circumstances, to simply expect that individuals, by cultivating emotional intelligence, by appreciative intelligence, it's all going to be fine. No, it cannot be fine. So you might ask, then what is the use of emotional intelligence? Well, if individuals can understand their emotions, why they have such low self-esteem, why they are not able to be self-efficacious no matter how they work, why they are not able to achieve the American dream. No, even if they work two, three jobs and their children can barely access healthcare, their children can barely have nutritious food, especially now since we are doing away with, SNAP and, nutritional, programs in schools. So then one can understand that there is a certain degree of discrepancy between what the society established as foundational equality and liberty and justice and pursuit of happiness for all as given rights, and then what the society practices. Then individuals may, in a peaceful way, gather to understand what is wrong with the system and to be able to know that it's not their inadequacies, it is the inadequacies of the system that is creating these circumstances in their life. Then they can align with like-minded individuals and bring about changes. That's what happened in the 1960s when these individual civil rights were violated. They realized and they sacrificed, and they, members of all ethnic, socioeconomic, religious communities came together to ask for civil rights, and they accomplished that. Likewise, we can ask for reducing income inequalities and providing opportunities for children by cultivating emotional intelligence, by cultivating our appreciative intelligence, by reframing situations, saying that societal pathology doesn't have to be identified, internalized as private pain. It's like what Oscar Lewis said, public issues, private pain. There are a lot of public issues like lack of healthcare, lack of childcare, lack of adequate transportation, lack of housing, and we have increase in homeless population. All of those don't, excuse me. Oh, I had the same thing. I want to sneeze, but I'm not able to sneeze. That's okay. So all of this can be looked at within the context of what public issues are causing private pain, and how do we distinguish between what is my private pain due to my own inadequacies and what are the obstacles that are placed in the actualization of my children's potential because of society's inadequacies. And therefore, we can then move forward, advance in the self-actualization of not just our children, but for any particular my children or your children or a community's children, but the children of the world, because every child comes into this world with potential for self-actualization. And therefore, how do we create the conditions that are by removing the societal pathology and bringing about, for instance, restorative justice. I read a case, one of the papers presented at the HLPF talked about a case where in a specific country, a child for stealing something, he was 12-year old and he stole something very small. For that, he was sentenced to 3 years in the incarceration system, incarcerated with children, of course. And even then, he was expected to pay $3,000 in fine. His currency is entirely different, and it is like 70 of his country's currency would be equal to $1. And so he was expected to pay $3,000 in fine. And so a civil society group that was focused on justice for children, took up his case and, had legal representation and canceled the fine and got him released because he had already served 3 years. And to me, when I read that case, that is a quintessential example of a society's pathology in not understanding children's needs, not understanding injustice framework, not understanding, our need for opportunities for children's self-actualization, for their own country's well-being, for their own country's future, for their inability to envision a future where their citizens would be free of this kind of unusual and cruel punishment. And but even now, the World Justice Project, for instance, came up with its, Justice Index report after studying 101 countries. And they said, we live in a world where only 17% of the individuals who need legal help actually approach a legal mechanism, including, dispute resolution. And many of them don't have the capacity to seek legal help. And so, therefore, if we truly understand that there is universal justice and there is, a sense of international law, that we want to have in our approach to how we look at, crime and punishment, and, how we move away from pure retributive, justice system to rehabilitative, people-oriented, access-based justice system that many communities in many different parts of the world, including Australia, UK, and our own country, we are having. Like, I attended a 3-day sort of conference summit, come training a few years ago in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where they have the International Institute of Restorative Justice. And since then, the restorative justice movement has grown tremendously. And it was fascinating in terms of understanding how the restorative justice system can be equal parcel, part and parcel of the education system, especially in schools. So we need to distinguish, societal pathology and identify as such instead of saying, oh, build your own resilience, build your own emotional intelligence, and that's somehow going to will take care of the issues. No, we have to, simultaneously work on both at the same time and we have a healthy understanding of where my own private pain stops and where my private pain to what extent is caused by public issues over which I have no control on my own, but collectively we might bring about change.
No, thank you. Maybe you can delve a little further into how do you explain the role of socialization processes that foster appreciative intelligence?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, socialization has everything, right? And socialization to a large extent is cultural, how we socialize our children, our cultural patterns. But universally, we know socialization requires a non-ceasing supply of unconditional love for our children. Children who can love themselves and love others can then give love. So I would define peace as a presence of love, not love in the common limited sense, where we, we understand it as romantic love or, conditional love, but love in the sense of universal love, universal brotherhood that is greater for greater and small, universal love for our environment, our space. And that kind of love can come about only when children have experienced complete acceptance, complete love. And even today, every day I tell my children, I love you so much, and sending loads of love and praise and blessings, even in text, every day. And my children are used to it, and they would say, "Love you, mom," and they might say, not as in detail as I said message, but they always say, "Love you, mom," or "Thank you," or "Rest today," "Don't work so hard," something like that. Very much loving, and and even today. So human beings, we cannot give something we don't have. If we haven't experienced love in our socialized formative years, well, that kind of love, we cannot give that, And so we need to be able to focus on love as the primary factor, and not, expecting children to be, I mean, or Western socialization can be very much rule-based socialization, like, oh, you do this X and you get Y. It's important. I mean, we have to teach reinforcements and punishment and reward system and, but to a certain extent. But if a child is crying so much for something, it seems like the child is not breathing because he or she is shouting so much, crying because they want to have something at that point. I would say just give that, because the child is depriving herself or himself of oxygen to the brain during the time when they're not like holding their breath, and then have a conversation when the child is capable of listening to you. Because no matter how you say when the child is crying, no, you did that, you can't have that, it is because the child is a being. They're not small people. They are growing being, and children are, in my view, divine beings. They have so much potential. Their brain is growing so fast. Everything, they take in so much stimuli. So let's not add the pressure. Let's reduce the pressure. Let's, when they stop, if it is something that is not going to violate the siblings' boundaries or not going to cross any boundaries, just go with the flow and give the child a sense of control that they have, that they can control their environment. And because when that happens, they are able to appreciate more, what they are going through and what the rights of others begin, because their own rights are validated. Their own being is respected. Their voices are heard. In order to hear someone else's voice, we need to be able to have a sense that our own voices are being heard, right? And so that kind of a socialization system, which I call as, unconditional love and unconditional positive regard, which Carl Rogers, I don't know whether you're familiar with Carl Rogers' work, he said, a therapist have to have the capacity for unconditional positive regard for the client, and which is not just put on, but you really have that positive regard, not for the therapist's sake, but for the process's sake. The process itself is imbued with a sense of positive regard and respect um, and affirmation for the client's experience. Likewise, a child growing up is in need of positive regard constantly. I may be like cooking, and my youngest one, when he was growing up, was very fond of coming and telling, Mom, I want to show you something. And so I say, Kana, I'm cooking. Can you wait just for a moment? No, just take a second. I just want to show. So what do? I turn off the stove and I sit down and think, okay, show me what is it? What is it? The food is, I make sure that the food is not going to get burnt. And I sit with him and listen to him. It just takes maybe half a minute. But for him, it validated his experience. And guess what? Even now, he would want to share something. And my other kids are too. When they call, when I'm doing something, we talk practically every day. My adult children, my children are, respectively 38, the 35 and 34. And even then, we talk every day, the most days. And so that kind of a relationship, not that we don't have arguments, we of course have arguments, we have, sometimes, does things that we discuss that may be sometimes painful, right? Every child, and in terms of their own experiences, but never forgetting the sense of, recognition that at the end we have this enormous supply of unconditional love, unconditional positive regard for each other that will stand through our conflict in terms of our approaches to life, our takes on life. Because, as someone who has more experience, you've seen most of life, but I cannot expect my children, to see that in their 30s when I'm in my 60s, and when they're in their 60s, probably they can appreciate it more. So I just have to be patient. So patience and this an environment, conscious parenting is extremely important. That everything we say and do matters when during our children's formative years, and to be able to, appreciative of their peers, and they ask them like children say, hey, what happened at school? Oh, nothing. And then if that's their first response, that's okay. And then when they're watching television, and sit with them, and no passive television, and relate that to, oh, so it's something like that. And they themselves may volunteer information. And so a conscious, attentive parenting, where we don't assume our children as belonging to us, but children don't belong to anyone. They belong to the world of, future citizens. We are just given the responsibility to cherish them, nurture them, love them, provide for their upkeep, and make sure that they're actualizing their potential. It's extremely important. Then that is the cultivation that sets the framework for cultivating their emotional intelligence, their ability to recognize their emotions, validate their emotions, and being aware of it, and to be able to navigate through the response patterns. and to understand that they need to have a sense of responsibility and, for their own self-actualization that you instill in them. Yeah. By the way, I have to say, I'm not by any means a perfect parent. Like all parents, we all make mistakes, we learn. And so, no one has to be, put on an expectation of, oh, be perfect at your parenting. No, everyone, but being conscious of our parenting roles and being responsible and for all the things that our children need is important in my view. And to model them, if you don't want them to you do use drugs, don't do drugs. Don't have it even as a habit. And if you don't want them to smoke, don't smoke. I've never smoked, never used drugs. If you don't want them to drink, don't drink. I mean, end of story. I used to have occasionally a glass of wine for Christmas or, for some, or champagne for some. I think 8 years ago, I stopped that. I said, why have that? Then, you can toast with you know, mm, apple cider and so many other things and non-alcoholic drinks. Because then, if you drink even a drop of alcohol, in my view, you don't have the right to tell your children don't drink. I mean, or anyone else. Yeah. So,
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I mean, I think I always remind folks and remind myself, we are our own worst critic. And so especially when it comes to parenting,
yeah.
there's no guidebook and there's a whole bunch of books out there, but at the end of the day, it's, you rely on your values and your
Yeah.
ethics, and you just have to do what you think is right, uh, and also know if you need assistance to get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, very much so. That's another thing. I mean, needing of public issues. Our society doesn't give anywhere enough support for parents. It's absolutely lacking. We used to live in, large families where aunts, uncles, grandparents. We don't live like that anymore. And so therefore, the society has to understand, a well-designed after-school program, well-designed childcare programs where there's a healthy caretaker child ratio exists, they are all extremely important. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you for continuing to cultivate that beautiful relationship with your children and reminding us and different ways to keep doing that. And so it can definitely see the fruits of your labor as you have that very unique, special relationship with them. Shifting a little bit to we're living in these unprecedented times, to say the least, of geopolitical changes. There's AI, there's crisis in leadership, exacerbation of inequities in public forums. How can organizations support individuals and groups and communities to develop positive strategies for problem solving through emotional and appreciative intelligence?
Well, absolutely. First thing that needs to take place is stock taking. Organizations have to assess their own capacity for meeting some of the, needs of their workers that are impacting their performance at work. I mean, every organization wants to have a culture where innovation is celebrated, where positive work is acknowledged and celebrated, where productivity is in accordance with the goals that they set. But organizations are entities that accomplish goals. So when we have both short-term goals and long-term goals within our missions and when we have a vision, we need to have an organizational culture that is conducive to accomplishing that. So one of the ways in which organizations can ensure that they have a culture that is based on appreciation is to recognize the contribution of each and every worker. And if a worker is, not showing up in a way, they may show up to work, but not performing in accordance with their expectation. Or the roles that the worker previously performed are now being taken over by AI. And, just today, a firm sent home Microsoft actually, fired a lot of their lawyers. And so because they don't need them anymore. And so, because AI can do quite a bit of what friend level lawyers do, and I was having a conversation with someone in this morning exactly about that. Do we even need associates anymore in law firms? And so, because they are the ones who do the research, legal research, and write up briefs and all that. If AI can do that in a way that is so fast and synthesize this voluminous amount of information, a human being can check for error and make sure it all has all the components. And then, so therefore, in such a rapidly evolving work culture, we need to be able to celebrate the accomplishments of those workers who are part of the organization. And to be able to and Japanese culture is very unique in that, because I so appreciate their work culture. Yes, of course, they work very hard, and there are, some, suicidal risk and used to be high at one point. But they have this loyalty to their workers that it's very different. They don't fire their workers. And many of them have, they're shareholders of the very same organization where they work. And so that creates a sense of purpose, which is much larger than a paycheck. And when your livelihood is assured, and when your progress, economic progress, determines in so many ways what we do for our life, in terms of leisure, in terms of further opportunities. So, therefore, a reasonable amount of economic security is necessary. And organizations have to provide that. In order for them to provide that, they have to innovate and grow. So, therefore, organizations have to take stock of what are their employees in terms of their own sense of well-being. Do they feel appreciated in their work? I mean, in the old style, oh, do job satisfaction surveys, and they are useless. Job satisfaction, so the surveys use certain scales that are outdated, that, that maybe they had a lot of internal consistency, and, and all of that, a very high reliability and validity before, when the scales were constructed. But in the times have changed so much, and there are organizations, they still use the old job satisfaction survey and say, oh, everybody is satisfied. That is such we have to have accurate metrics of where people are in our organization, number one. Number two, if when we understand that they're not contributing as much as they can, and our team building mechanisms are faltering, then we need to build our team spirit by bringing together individuals to share as human beings, right? And to provide the safety and the security for the space in which they share, where confidentiality is assured, where their individual experiences are validated and respected, and you seen as growth opportunities, as opposed to gossiping, or as opposed to social undermining. Many of our organizations practice what is called a social undermining, like a water cooler conversation, where gossiping and when putting someone down, or misquoting someone, and that can be detrimental to women especially, and minority women especially, and minority males to experience that that's what studies show, at a increased level than members of the majority communities, and members of the communities where their economic security is assured, and that gives them more confidence. Someone said, well, you want to see a man or a woman with confidence, show me a rich person. When they have monetary security, they automatically have self-confidence. I don't think that's the case. There are a lot of people with the enormous amount of money who lack class, competence, and capacity to understand and respect each other, and who just don't have, comprehension of other people's needs and organizational needs. So so monetary accomplishment cannot be equated with having a very high emotional intelligence or very high appreciative intelligence. Although recent studies show leaders of organizations who have high emotional intelligence can lead well. I'm not talking about political organizations, but corporations and educational institutions and nonprofit organizations and international organizations and so on and so forth, where that holds true. So that's how, by celebrating, by appreciating our employees, by having consistent mechanisms for growth, and by the organizations themselves having continuous improvement. Again, and the Japanese companies do what is called as the PDCA, plan, do, check, act mechanism, which is you plan for something, you implement it, and then you check whether it's working, and then you act on improving it. And this is a cycle. It's not linear. You just keep repeating it. They took it from Edward Deming's Total Quality Management, which I absolutely love. And unfortunately, we are not big on that. We used to have quality circles and quality management in the 90s and early part of 2000, but we are not doing it. We have variations of that in small forms in different areas, but we're not doing that. But consistent improvement and consistent conscious development of appreciation for each other and celebration for each other, and we're helping our employees with emotional safety and security, and having mechanisms that are not punitive but growth oriented and transformative in terms of their alignment with organizational values and goals is important.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this insightful and just, greatly appreciate, the enlightening conversations we tend to have. I just wanted to extend my deepest gratitude to you for sharing your wisdom, experience, and heart with us today. Your reflections on appreciative emotional intelligence really just remind us that peace building is not just about resolving conflicts, it's about nurturing relationships, honoring each other's humanity, and leading definitely with empathy, even as we try to be averse to difficult conversations. But so, no, thank you so much through your work in education and leadership. And I'm glad that through your, even just your experience with the United Nations high level public forum, there was great opportunities for further development and inspiration that has led us here today. It just it's a wonderful reminder, I guess, of the commitment to day-to-day ethical and compassionate action, and how it shows up at sustainable change within awareness, intention, and the connection that we strive to build. Two questions that kind of not to answer, but just that kind of resonate with me, and maybe for our listeners today, I would definitely encourage folks to kind of consider how might you use appreciative emotional insights in your own life to build bridges, and also how, what small shifts in perspectives could we do to open the doors to deepen understanding within our community or even with like our so thank you so much for joining us on this journey. I've definitely found today's conversation meaningful, and I greatly appreciate you. And so definitely until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, keep building peace, one conversation at a time, as we say.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me share and be myself. And thank you. Yeah,
Always, always. And I look forward to our ongoing conversation.
likewise. Thank you.